I was accused of stealing $200,000. The company director I trusted set me up to hide his machinations. While I fought for my name, he enjoyed life with the stolen money. But he made a mistake, he left me alive. I worked in the financial department of McAllister and Partners, a Fortune 500 company with headquarters in downtown Chicago. My corner office on the 32nd floor offered a breathtaking view of Lake Michigan, a daily reminder of how far I'd come since my humble beginnings in South Side. Good salary, stability, prospects for advancement, everything was going perfectly. Until that Monday morning when two security officers walked into my office without knocking. "Alex Mercer?" the taller one asked, though he clearly knew who I was. "We need to talk." The serious expressions on their faces told me this wasn't about the quarterly security training everyone had been putting off. My stomach tightened as I followed them down the hallway. The other employees averted their eyes as we passed, already treating me like I was contaminated. Within minutes, I was sitting in the conference room, the one usually reserved for board meetings and high-profile clients. Across the polished mahogany table sat Janet from HR, two security officers, and a man I'd never seen before who introduced himself as a forensic accountant. "Mr. Mercer," Janet began, sliding a folder across the table. "We've found a suspicious transfer in the company accounts. $200,000. I opened the folder, and the numbers stared back at me accusingly. The transaction details showed the money had been routed through 3 separate accounts before landing in an offshore bank. And there, at the bottom of the page, was my digital signature. "This isn't me," I croaked, my mouth suddenly dry. "I didn't do this." The forensic accountant cleared his throat. "We have records confirming the transaction was executed from your workstation. Your login credentials were used, and the timing corresponds to when you were in the building according to the security logs." The world seemed to slow down. A cold sensation spread through my chest as the realization hit me. I knew exactly who was behind this. Robert Kingston, the CFO. Salt and pepper hair, always perfectly styled, custom Italian suits, and a smile that could charm anyone in the room. The man who had personally recruited me from a smaller firm 3 years ago, who called me his financial prodigy, and insisted I join his team for drinks every Friday. The same man who had grown increasingly distant over the past 6 weeks. It had started with a routine audit. I was reviewing quarterly expenses when I noticed discrepancies, vendor payments to companies I couldn't find any record of, consulting fees that seemed excessively high, travel expenses for meetings that didn't appear on anyone's calendar. When added together, they pointed to millions of dollars flowing out of the company to unknown destinations. I brought my findings to Robert's attention one evening when everyone else had left. We were in his office, the Chicago skyline glittering behind him as he reviewed my documentation. "This is concerning," he had said, frowning. "Let me look into it." The next day, he called me in again. "It's nothing, Alex," he assured me with that winning smile. "Some of these are special projects for our overseas branches. Others are confidential acquisitions we're exploring. Trust me, it's all above board." But something in his demeanor had changed. The casual arm around my shoulder felt stiff. The invitation to his lake house that weekend was rescinded due to a family emergency. And twice I found him at my desk when I returned from lunch, claiming he was borrowing a charger. I should have known then. But I trusted him. Instead, I continued digging. I spent late nights cross-referencing transactions, tracking money flows, and building a visualization of where the funds were actually going. The picture it painted was damning: systematically siphoned money moving through shell companies that all led back to a holding corporation in the Cayman Islands. The day before my confrontation with security, I had emailed Robert that I needed to speak with him urgently about financial irregularities that require immediate attention. He had responded promptly, scheduling a meeting for Tuesday morning. I never made it to Tuesday. "Alex?" Janet's voice pulled me back to the present. Do you have anything to say in your defense? Robert Kingston is behind this, I said, my voice steadier than I expected. He's been embezzling from the company for months, possibly years. I found evidence and was going to report it. This is his way of silencing me. The looks exchanged across the table told me everything. They didn't believe a word. Mr. Kingston is actually the one who first flagged the suspicious activity, the security officer said. He noticed unusual access patterns to the financial systems and requested an audit. Of course he did. He had set the stage perfectly. We'll need your company ID and laptop, Janet said. You're suspended pending investigation, and we've already notified the authorities. Given the amount involved, this is a criminal matter now. I handed over my badge and computer in a daze. As security escorted me out of the building, my phone buzzed with a text from Robert, sorry to hear about what happened. If you need a reference after this is cleared up, let me know. The audacity was breathtaking. He was already playing the sympathetic former boss, establishing his innocence in electronic records that investigators would surely review. The next 3 weeks were a nightmare. FBI agents interviewed me multiple times. My bank accounts were frozen. Former colleagues stopped responding to my messages. My girlfriend of 2 years, Melissa, stood by me at first, but her faith wavered as evidence against me mounted. When Robert's team discovered that I had been living beyond my means, a fabricated report showing expensive restaurant visits and luxury purchases I never made, she packed her things and left. I don't even know who you are anymore, were her parting words. The company pressed charges. Every morning, I woke up to new headlines: rising financial star charged with embezzlement, McAllister and Partners executive faces 20 years for fraud. Through it all, Robert Kingston was untouchable. The perfect example of corporate leadership, expressing profound disappointment in interviews about his protégé's betrayal. He even established a new compliance program in response to the unfortunate incident, earning praise from industry watchdogs. While I sat in my increasingly empty apartment, fielding calls from debt collectors as my savings dwindled, Robert was promoted to executive vice president. His Instagram showed him vacationing in Miami, lounging on a yacht with his picture-perfect family, living the high life on stolen money, my money, in a sense, since I was taking the fall for his crimes. But he made one critical mistake: he underestimated my determination. I lost my job. My reputation. My relationship. Almost everything. But not my patience. Not my intelligence. And certainly not my drive for justice. I began methodically rebuilding the case I had started before my termination. Working from a cheap laptop in coffee shops with free Wi-Fi, I reached out to former classmates who still worked at the company. Most ignored me, but Diane from Accounts Payable had always questioned Robert's charm offensive. Something always seemed off about him, she told me during a clandestine meeting in a downtown bookstore. The way he would suddenly appear whenever sensitive information was being discussed, how he insisted on personal approval for certain vendor payments. She couldn't provide company documents, that would risk her job, but she confirmed what I already suspected: Robert's scheme had expanded. With me out of the picture and his position more secure than ever, he had grown bolder in his embezzlement. My breakthrough came from an unexpected source. James, the IT guy who had helped set up my workstation years ago, reached out through an anonymous email. "I know you didn't do it," he wrote. "Kingston asked me to install monitoring software on your computer 2 months before everything went down. Said it was part of a security audit. I didn't think much of it then, but now." James provided something invaluable: access to the company's archived server backups that hadn't yet been purged. Robert thought he had covered his tracks by deleting incriminating files, but he didn't understand how the backup system worked. The encrypted files were still there, preserved in digital amber. Over the next month, I worked tirelessly, breaking through encryption and piecing together the fragments of Robert's operation. The picture that emerged was far worse than I had initially discovered. This wasn't opportunistic embezzlement, it was a sophisticated scheme spanning 5 years. Robert had stolen nearly $12 million, using increasingly complex methods to conceal the theft. When I had enough evidence, I compiled everything into a detailed report and sent it to the Securities and Exchange Commission. Their investigation would take time, but it would be thorough. But time was something I no longer had the luxury of. My trial date was approaching, and my court-appointed attorney was already pushing for a plea deal. With the evidence they have, fighting this could mean 20 years instead of 5, he warned. I needed to accelerate matters. Using skills I had developed during the investigation, I created an anonymous identity and leaked selected documents to financial journalists and industry bloggers. I was careful not to release everything. The SEC needed to make their own discoveries for the case to be bulletproof. The story caught fire faster than I anticipated. McAllister and Partners, the real fraud, headlined financial news sites. Online forums dissected every document, finding connections I had missed. Hashtag Kingstongate started trending. The company's stock plummeted. Investors demanded answers. And Robert Kingston, who had been untouchable for so long, suddenly found himself under scrutiny. He responded predictably, with righteous indignation and categorical denials. In a company-wide email that was promptly leaked, he dismissed the allegations as a desperate attempt by a disgraced former employee to shift blame. What he didn't know was that I had saved my most damning evidence for last. As the SEC investigation gained momentum, I anonymously delivered the final piece, video footage from a restaurant in Manhattan, showing Robert meeting with the owners of 2 shell companies 3 years earlier. The conversation, captured by my directional microphone from a nearby table, clearly detailed how they would structure the fraudulent payments. I had been sitting on this evidence, waiting for the perfect moment. That dinner meeting had been a lucky break. I was in New York for a conference and spotted Robert with men I didn't recognize. Something about their furtive behavior made me suspicious enough to record them. At the time, I thought I was being paranoid. Now, it was my smoking gun. The day federal agents arrived at McAllister and Partners headquarters, I watched from across the street, nursing a coffee in a nondescript sedan. Employees streamed out as investigators seized computers and documents. Robert returned from a business trip that same day, summoned by the board for emergency questioning. His face on the business news channels had lost its confident glow. The perfect hair was slightly disheveled, the custom suit wrinkled from the flight. I followed him to the airport the next day. He was trying to flee, just as I had predicted. His family had already left the country. According to social media posts, his daughter hadn't been discreet enough to hide. As TSA agents and federal officers converged on him at the international terminal, I stepped out from behind a pillar, locking eyes with him for the first time since my dismissal. "You!" he gasped, recognition and realization dawning simultaneously. "You orchestrated all of this?" I smiled, savoring the moment I had imagined for months. "No, Robert. You orchestrated it yourself. I just made sure everyone could see the performance." His face contorted with rage as the officers led him away in handcuffs. "This isn't over, Alex. You have no idea who you're dealing with." But it was over for Robert Kingston. The evidence was overwhelming. The trial was swift, the verdict unanimous. 15 years in federal prison, with no possibility of parole for at least 10. Restitution of all stolen funds. His assets seized, his reputation destroyed. As for me, my name was cleared, though the stain of accusation never fully washes away. McAllister and Partners offered me my job back with a substantial raise and public apology, but I declined. Some bridges, once burned, should stay that way. Instead, I accepted a position at Sentinel Financial Security, a firm specializing in detecting and preventing corporate fraud. The irony isn't lost on me, my personal nightmare has become my professional expertise. Sometimes I wonder if it was all worth it. The months of isolation, the financial ruin, the broken relationships. Melissa reached out after the truth emerged, but some betrayals can't be undone. Trust, once shattered, leaves permanent cracks, even when repaired. Robert's wife divorced him before the trial concluded. His children changed their last name. His elderly mother died while he was in custody, and he wasn't permitted to attend the funeral. My revenge extended beyond what I had intended, creating ripples of collateral damage I hadn't foreseen. There are nights when I wake up sweating, remembering the look in his eyes as they took him away, not just anger, but a hollow recognition that everything he valued was gone. In those moments, I question whether justice and vengeance are truly different paths, or merely different names for the same destination. But then I remember the cold conference room, the accusations, the nights alone in my empty apartment, and the hardness returns. Robert Kingston made his choices. He would have let me go to prison without a second thought. My new office also has a view of water, the Hudson River this time. Sometimes I stand at the window, watching the currents flow, carrying everything downstream. I've learned that secrets don't stay buried forever. Like bodies in a river, they eventually surface, no matter how deep you think you've sunk them. And I've learned something else, something I share with every new client who sits across from my desk: never trust those who smile too widely. Behind perfect teeth often lie perfect lies.